Dominic. Hello, it's good to see you, sir.
I'll be very brief so that we can really get into the Q&A, but I did want to offer just a few thoughts to begin with. Beginning with a quick update on the pace of the work that we're doing together as we're rebuilding the foundations of so much of our transportation system in partnership with one another. Across the country, we have started repairing over 3,700 bridges, improving nearly 70,000 miles of roads, and we have funded over 1,000 zero-emission buses across the country already. We have strengthened our supply chains. We've worked to make railroads safer. And the pace of our work is rising to meet the nature of the ferocious challenges that we face right now, from short-term disruptions to our labor force and our air transportation systems, to systemic long-term challenges like road safety and modernization across our national airspace, and the urgent imperative of advancing fairness and equity in our systems, to the existential threat of climate change. And to meet these challenges and to make the most of this opportunity in front of us, we're going to have to continue working not just hard, working not just smart, but working together. And I've been delighted since taking this position, and certainly since we got the good news of the president's signature on that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, to see exactly that kind of collaboration happening between us. Give you just a few examples of that I'm especially encouraged by. Thank you for your swift and innovative action to develop the plans that are going into that national network of electric vehicle chargers. As you know, we recently published the final standards for those EV chargers and the final Build America, Buy America implementation plan so that you can get to work placing these orders. But we never could have gotten to this point as swiftly as we have, undertaking just one of many novel multi-billion-dollar efforts provided for by this infrastructure plan without how every single state came together and worked with us to get your plans together, to get them approved, and to move forward. When it comes to safety, I appreciate your alignment with our department on the urgent action that is needed to respond to the national crisis of roadway deaths. We've been funding states, of course, through the Highway Safety Improvement Program and local communities through our Safe Streets and Roads for All program. But we don't view those as distinct or separate with regard to the overall mission that we all share. And local governments will continue to benefit enormously from your support and expertise. And I know that by working together, we're going to be able to multiply the impact and the effect of the investments that we're making. And I appreciate the teamwork on investing in those communities that have historically been underserved and overburdened in our transportation infrastructure construction. We just announced the winners of our Reconnecting Communities grants, reuniting neighborhoods that have been divided by decisions in the past. And I would say just the process of gathering the applications for that program has been an extraordinary history lesson. But we, of course, aren't doing this in order to wallow in the history. We are doing this in order to move forward into the future. And these grants are going to help get shovels in the ground, as well as the planning grants that are going to help communities further develop the projects that can hopefully earn the federal and state funding to make them a reality. And as you're making those decisions, I urge you to continue to work collaboratively with us, with your local governments, with one another where appropriate. And we have some great examples of multi-state collaboration that we've been celebrating recently. I would also encourage you to make sure that your civil rights leadership has a seat at the table. We're working hard at the DOT to modernize our own civil rights programs. And soon you'll be hearing more from us about how we can work together to make sure our transportation work meets the requirements of legislation like Title VI and the ADA and DOT's own regulations. I also just want to stress the extent to which we are living in a season of delivery. We have got to make sure, especially knowing that time is money and that we face such pressure on our costs, that we've got to work together to make every transportation dollar go as far as it possibly can. That's the goal of our Everyday Counts program, which identifies proven yet underutilized innovations at the state level to accelerate project delivery and then help rapidly deploy them across the country. And we just released the latest round of innovations we're featuring through Everyday Counts. So I'd urge you to become familiar with that and to continue contributing the lessons learned as you move forward in your work. We have to deliver good projects efficiently, effectively, on time, on task, and on budget. And a big part of how we get that done is by working together to make sure we get it right early in the process, which of course is a huge part of what AASHTO is all about. So again, I want to thank you for your partnership. We have a lot to celebrate, but we have a lot more to do. And so I look forward to the conversation right now about how we can continue our teamwork. Thanks again for having me.
Really appreciate it. As AASHTO president, I've been stressing our strategic plan goals of safety, mobility, and access for everyone. Our emphasis areas this year are on creating a resilient transportation system, one that's safe and sound and smart. So what do you think is the best way to use the IIJA resources at our disposal to create a truly resilient national system that can effectively respond not only to extreme weather and cybersecurity, but to post-COVID transportation demands and the long-term demographic trends in our country, among many other inevitable changes?
Well, this kind of adaptation and resilience is very much on our mind right now. First, I would point to the funding that is programmed specifically toward this purpose. One of the announcements still to come, but soon to come, that we're looking forward to is the Protect discretionary side and the work we can do on dollars that are specifically set to this. What I try to explain publicly is a very common sense issue of, you get a road that gets washed out in 100-year floods that are turning into annual events. Are we really going to put it back right the way it was? Or are we going to find a new way? But of course, the story of resiliency goes to everything from evacuation routes in hurricane zones to seismic upgrades like what we recently marked at the Golden Gate Bridge, where we're using the bridge program to support a seismic retrofit there. But as you mentioned, there's resiliency in that classical sense of dealing with the oncoming and accelerating risk of extreme events. And then there are some of the events that are unfolding before us where you have to make 20, 30, 40, 50-year decisions without quite knowing what the end of this decade is going to look like in terms of commuting patterns, in terms of transportation needs, and in terms of technology. What we want to work with you on is to find the investments that make sense anyhow, those anyhow, no regrets moves, while retaining enough flexibility in our planning to make room for the fact that we still don't know what the new normal, so to speak, the equilibrium's really going to be on something like post-COVID commuting. I don't think anybody's figured it out. And so we have to hew to the things that we do know are going to matter, no matter what, around safety, around economic opportunity, around the climate and equity opportunities and responsibilities that we have, while recognizing that we also need plans and approaches that we can adjust fire on as we go. And we want to have that kind of flexibility with you too. It's part of why we've sought to write it into our programs, but we're very much ready to be in listen mode as we go to the next round of NOFOs and take what is really, if you look at the calendar, just our first year's worth of grant making and try to tune it up to be smarter for years 2 through 5 based on what we've learned from the results of year 1.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Protect. We're actually collaborating with our tribal communities on the coast.
Great.
And I hope they'll be applying for those grants, and looking forward to it. The White House released new EV standards 2 weeks ago to create a convenient, reliable, and made-in-America electric vehicle charging network. We're working hard to do our part in developing that national network, but there are a lot of challenges out there. One key challenge is the electricity itself, how to get it to the right place, ensure it's available at the right times, and that consumers can charge their electric vehicles at the right price. Now, I know the Inflation Reduction Act included tax credits and other investments to help develop that additional clean energy that we're going to need as we decarbonize transportation. While the energy generation world is not directly within the jurisdiction of the U.S. DOT and our states, us as state DOTs, you and Secretary Granholm are working together to help meet the President's goals. Can you give us an update on how the funding and the incentives in the IRA are going to help us address that challenge?
Yeah, we're incredibly excited about this moment that we're in right now, and you're right. I mean, there are so many challenges that are associated with this. I was just with one of the major automotive OEMs who is talking about how the EV revolution is. We're still getting our heads around how this is not an increment. This is not a layer on top of automotive as we knew it. It is a fundamental transformation, which is why you see companies completely reorganizing around this. And it's why we need to make sure that our strategies recognize that on one hand, just to take chargers as an example, we've got to think about how to fit it to the expectations of a public that is used to filling up.
Mhm.
And so, for example, part of why we're working with you to make sure you don't go more than 50 miles without knowing you're going to reach a filling station is because in the same way that today you go out on a road trip and you know that there's going to be a gas station for you, we got to make sure that tomorrow you can go out on a road trip and you know there's going to be a charger. And yet, the truth is, charging a car has more in common with charging your phone than it does filling up your car with gas.
Mhm.
In ways that are helpful and useful and make it a little easier, like the fact that you can do it at home, which most of us, I assume all of us, can't do with gas. As far as I know, some of you may have some very interesting homes. But also makes it more challenging and harder because it takes longer and because of, as you mentioned, the utility work that needs to be done. You may have visibilities that we don't because you work closely with your counterparts at the state level who deal with energy in things like the utility work that needs to go into site prep. And of course, many of you have lived this in getting your plans ready and have been very thoughtful about this as you filed your charging plans for how those formula dollars ought to work. And by the way, I mean, it's one thing to have 50 plus states and territories to work with, but at the energy level, you're talking about 3,000 plus utilities, many of which are very small and in local or private hands. But this is where I'm very proud of the collaboration we've established with Secretary Granholm and the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. I don't know of a joint office like what we've just created, $300 million of joint activity so that we can be in one room with our expertise on things like how a highway network ought to work, and their expertise on things like battery chemistry and what it's going to take to get the supply chains right, and when you need to be subsidizing refining capacity versus recycling capacity versus raw materials. So we're working to bring this into one common operating picture. But when it comes to principles like dig once, or local context like utility readiness, or even just figuring out the lessons learned and some of the things that we inevitably are going to be learning the hard way, we will look to you and your experience on the ground as you deploy these chargers and prepare your communities and your states for this revolution so that we can make sure we're getting it right in Washington. And we want to be very closely coordinating with you on that path because of all the 40 plus programs that are in IIJA just on the transportation side, and there's so many that I'm excited about. And some of them, from Protect to wildlife crossings are quite new and exciting. I don't think there's any one of them that is as novel in kind as the charging program. It's just different than what we've done. And so, of course, we're going to have to learn together as we go.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I have these 200 car, 2,500 passenger ferry boats that I have to fast charge in downtown Seattle, and the electric infrastructure for that is quite an on-take. But we're getting it done. We're getting it done, and we're going to have an electric ferry running in 2024. Very much looking forward to it. As you know, there's been a lot of talk about the proposed rule and guidance from OMB related to Buy America. We at AASHTO are completely bought in to the concept of Buy America. The concern, though, is the timing as domestic industries are being developed. We've got a lot of work that we got to do right now, and we want to buy that product, but that product's not made here yet. So will you be working with the state DOTs, the construction industry, and others to ensure that while that domestic capacity is being developed, any new Buy America requirements don't unduly delay projects?
So I'll say two things. First, we're very serious and very committed on Buy America. The president is passionate about this. It's part of an economic agenda that we think is writ large the reason why we have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs in the U.S. since the president took office, and we're just getting started. And so we're raising the bar. The second thing I want to say is we get it. This is new. This is hard. And drawing the line in the right way can be a real challenge. I would liken it a bit to CAFE standards. When we get it right, the law says maximum feasible. And that balance between maximum and feasible is tricky to find. But I will say every time we've done it, we've hit a mark that industry felt was, at least in the early push-pull, was impossible. And then because they had to, they rallied and they exceeded it. And so we want to make sure with this transition, and no question it's a transition, there are domestic capacities that really just aren't there yet, that we're recognizing the difference between where we are and where we need to get to, with as much rigor as we can put in the process to make sure that not a day is lost, but a level of common sense too. And we will continue to work with you because we share this goal of project delivery, of swift project delivery. And I know that Buy America, with everything else that you're trying to balance, adds yet another category of things that are difficult. We're living that with you. We recognize it. And while I want to make sure I'm being very candid about how high we're going to keep that bar, we do want to make sure that anything that is, that there's no, as you said, no unnecessary delays. Yeah. And we want to find the right way to get that line.
Great. Well, looking forward to working with you on that balance. Now, you came to your role from being a mayor and working on safe streets. I came to my role from working at Smart Growth America and running the National Complete Streets Coalition. And there were a lot of people that didn't think that DOTs got it, that AASHTO got it, and here we are. So I'm really excited about that myself, the notion of this safe systems approach. We're very proud to be standing with USDT as a first mover on the National Roadway Safety Strategy, and that safe systems approach and complete streets are a key component of what we can do as infrastructure owners and operators to address the really devastating number of fatalities and injuries we're seeing out there. Nationwide, the economic impact, the societal cost of those crashes is $1.4 trillion a year. That's 7 times the combined budgets of all of the state DOTs. I'd also note that WashDOT was also one of the first movers. We're happy to do that, as was the Missouri DOT, and there'll be more. What else can state DOTs do to keep the momentum of the call to action moving forward?
Well, first of all, I want to recognize and thank AASHTO for stepping up and joining us and being among those first movers, and that goes for your state DOTs who have stepped up as well. And we need to continue enlisting partners because it's woven into the very fabric of our National Roadway Safety Strategy that nobody can do this alone. We can't do it alone. No one player can do it alone, but all of us can do it together. State, federal, local, tribal, territorial, public and private, to which I would add academic. I mean, every sector needs to be pulling in the same direction. And we really need to be in the mentality of confronting a major crisis, because we would not stand for this level of destruction and loss of life in any other mode of transportation. We wouldn't settle for it in any other aspect of American life. And yet here we are, I think, so bathed in roadway deaths, so used to them, that it can feel as if it's a cost of business, and most dangerously, it can feel as if it's not preventable. We all know better, and I've seen so many of you lead in setting the right tone before we even get to the nuts and bolts of the policy steps. Setting that tone, and I would urge you to continue to do that, to press your elected leaders to continue to do that too. Because I see light bulbs going off in people's minds the moment you point to what we've accepted up until now and what we could achieve if we really got together on this. Where do we go from here? Well, first of all, I do want to acknowledge how I think there's been enormous evolution on the part of state DOTs. And state DOTs are an indispensable part. When we were doing our Complete Streets work in South Bend, we could only get it done because of a relinquishment that we were working on with INDOT. And there's so many ways that this requires teamwork. One very concrete thing I might suggest is, as we're funding the local players on Safe Roads and Streets for All, some states have demonstrated a readiness to provide or support that local match. That could be a huge difference maker. And look, in dollar figures, these are among the more modest grants that we're making. But as you know, some of the communities that need the most help will be the ones that even a match on a 6-figure grant is going to be tough. And those are some of the places where there's the most hotspots. By the way, there's an amazing data visualization tool, if you haven't seen it yet, that's been put together that I hope is a great asset to you in targeting your work. But things like that can make a big difference. And we need to continue viewing this as both a cultural and a technical project. To be a country that does not accept this level of roadway death, and to work through all of the proven steps that can make a difference. And the last thing I'll mention is just, I think on the road to zero, we really need to focus on the successes. Zero sounds so far off that it really feels impossible. And part of how I try to remind folks what's possible is that zero is more often than not in recent years what we have seen in terms of passenger airline deaths. And if you can do that for a mode of transportation that involves being sent through the sky at the speed of sound almost in a metal tube, I don't know why we can't do that here on the ground. But the other reason we can believe in zero is that it's been achieved. Not nationwide, but in communities, including sizable communities of tens of thousands of people. So one thing that I would love to work with you on is identifying the counties, the towns that have, even the neighborhoods that have gotten to zero where they hadn't been able to do that before. Lift that up and then say, all right, we're going to add to that roster each passing year. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to be able to celebrate more places that did in fact get to zero. And I want the biggest place that got to zero each year to be bigger than the biggest place that got to zero last year. Right now, I think Oslo's winning. There are like 600,000 people. Here in the U.S., places like Jersey City, Edina, Minnesota, Hoboken, but those are places like 50,000 people in them. So let's build on what works, tell a new and better story, and then importantly, and literally, put our money where our mouth is, which is what we're seeking to do with the infrastructure funds.
That's great. Yeah, I visited with the mayor of Hoboken during TRB, and it's a great story. Multi-year zeros. Dr. Wilson, Secretary Wilson, and I had the pleasure of joining you and Administrator Regan and the Vice President about 4.5 months ago at the Accelerating Infrastructure Summit here in DC. I think Mitch was there too. It was quite the crowd. But what progress has been made on addressing the 3 roadblocks to accelerating infrastructure projects that you identified at the summit? The lack of data, the lack of technology, and a need for greater capacity. And what can state DOTs do to help remove some of those roadblocks and make sure the projects move forward efficiently, fiscally prudently, and in an environmentally responsible manner?
Well, on the data side, I'm really encouraged by the sharing that's gone on, and we're doubling down on everything from visualization tools to just transparency practices to try to make sure you can see more of what we see and vice versa. That's also important to us because we're trying to follow the money a bit more than we usually do, just to understand the great work that you all are doing with the formula dollars, so that we can help tell that story and build support for continuing to fund the states through formula. And I don't want it to feel like just because that fraction of the funding that goes discretionary is the part we spend the most hours on, maybe in my office, that we care about that more than the successes that you are all delivering with the formula side. On the technology side, we're pretty soon to release the first round of SMART grants. Very excited about that. And we see a lot of existing technologies that could be aligned in better and smarter ways, and want to work with you on that. But at the highest level, we've got to make sure, and you mentioned capacity as the third leg of that stool, we've got to make sure we're building capacity across the board, not just the hiring that we're doing and that you're doing, but the community readiness, the understanding of what has to happen early rather than late in the process, so that you don't have some last-minute NEPA curveball or cascading change orders that could have been seen earlier in the game. And to this, I would add the importance of what we're coming to call truthing, which is working with you to get really honest pictures of what the cost and timelines will be early on. If you may have seen, there's I used to have this brick of a book on my desk called the Oxford Handbook of Mega Project Management, which is by a scholarly group. Many of you might have spent time with this research, done a lot of research on large projects. There's now a more popular version of the book that's come out, but it's citing the same data set, which is if you look at the Venn diagram of projects that come on time, projects that come in on budget, and projects that deliver the expected benefit among very large projects, the population of that Venn diagram is about 0.5% of projects. Yeah. We have to beat that, and we have to beat that together. But half of being on time and on budget is having the right schedule and having the right budget. And so we're working to hold ourselves accountable for rewarding rather than punishing honesty up front. so that we can go into these things with the right expectations and then align our capacity toward the time and money that is actually going to be required. And again, you all are the tip of the spear, so we're going to be learning together, but we as a country have to learn fast.
Great, appreciate it. It looks like we're about out of time, but on behalf of everyone here, I wanted to thank you again, Mr. Secretary, for engaging our group and giving us your insight. Be welcome to give us any closing remarks and let you get on your way.
Again, my biggest task here is to thank you because I know that levels of expectation and work have been placed on your shoulders that are likely unprecedented in the lives of your state departments. And I know you've got elected officials asking a lot of questions because their expectations have been raised. You've got a public whose expectations have been raised. And I promise you we feel the exact same way here at the federal level. But we're excited. I mean, the things that we have already been able to celebrate together after year one of just working together to sell this bill and explain why it was needed. And then year two, which was setting up all of the machinery to actually get this funding out the door. Now we're in the really fun part and hard part, but a really fun part, right? Because we're actually getting these resources moving. And this is where we encounter the really devilish problems of delivery. Some of which are almost like laws of physics, and yet I think we can beat them. The problems of our time around workforce ability and raw material and cost escalation, inflation, and supply chains, in addition to the evergreen problems of project delivery. But aren't those problems so much more fun to work on than the problem of we don't have any money? Right? Like, aren't these the problems that we got into these careers to work on? Of course they're hard, but they're compelling. And the other side of the mountain, as we work through those problems, is that we will have not only transformed the physical infrastructure of our country, but we will have transformed the productive capacity of our country through all of the steps that we took to build that physical infrastructure, meaning that we will then go into the next decade with a workforce and a cadre of professionals in infrastructure construction, transportation, and engineering, capable of doing things that were not possible before. It is lifting up the entire country's ability to compete and to win. And so it ought to be hard, but we know that it's hard. And we're committed to continuing to work with you on finding out what it will take and learning those lessons together. That's exactly why AASHTO is as important as ever. And I thank you for what you're doing, what you're about to do, and the partnership all along the way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Wonderful.